Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for tuning into one of our talks today. I'm so excited today to be talking about the movie Sparks with director Edgar Wright. And the first thing I wanted to talk about is those first 10 to 15 minutes of the film, because you've spoken at length about how this is a film both for people who absolutely love Sparks and have been obsessed with them like you since the beginning of their careers, and then also to introduce people who've never heard of them before. And so those first 10 to 15 minutes are incredibly crucial and almost like a thesis of what's the story you're going to tell, who are they, and how are you going to tell it to us. And so what was the journey of really mapping out the beginning of the film and how you wanted to bring us into their world?
I think it was pretty much as you said, is that you kind of had to. It would be wrong to just start the story at the start, because you have to give people an understanding of like who we're going to talk about. If you were watching the film completely cold, obviously if you're watching a film about the Beatles, you can be quite confident in terms of like, it's Liverpool 1942 like, and you can just like, yeah, sure, with the Beatles. With Sparks, you need a bit of kind of context of like, what are the big questions people have about them, like what are the big things like the misnomers about them, that a lot of people thought they were British when they're in fact from Los Angeles. Like the idea that they're like the shock value of their kind of like early performances and how it inspired people. So it was the idea of like, you're kind of watching like the start of the thesis is like, this is what this film is going to be about, and now let's go back to the start. So it was sort of like important to kind of like sort of grab people and help them understand what they're about to see. But the thing about the whole thing was that I said this right from when I first suggested doing the documentary. I said that it's something where it's a celebration and an introduction. And I feel like there's some music documentaries that I watch, that even ones that I really enjoy, that I do think sometimes, thinking, if you didn't know this artist, does this film ever let you in to enjoy the artist? Now, I'm not going to mention any names, but there's a few that I watched even recently where I thought, I'm really enjoying this because I have a sort of working knowledge of their discography. But if you didn't, would you know what the hell was going on? So that was in my mind making it, as I'm thinking, you've got to give some breathing space for people to meet and enjoy Sparks.
Mm-hmm. But I also feel like part of how you bring us in and allow us to enjoy it so much is through your passion and your love of them. And there's even moments like when you're interviewing people, you haven't sanded down the edges of hearing you laughing off screen or riffing in conversation or asking questions at certain points. And, you know, with documentary filmmaking, there's often that question of objectivity as a director. But with this, did you feel like actually it wasn't a necessary thing to think about it from an objective perspective, because your passion is part of the story itself in a way?
I guess so. I mean, I didn't want to insert myself in the narrative too much. And, I'm only in the documentary because there was a guest that didn't turn up. And so I filled in their slot, because it was like, otherwise the camera crew were just sitting around for 2 hours. So I said, well, you can interview me. I can talk about Sparks. So I didn't plan to be in it. I did read one review that said, oh, Edgar Wright inserting himself into the narrative. I said, I only did it because Tim Burton didn't show up. But aside from that, I think the thing that was the fun thing for me about it, and maybe why some of the interviews are sort of like unguarded, is because it's just me talking to fellow Sparks fans. I'm not like approaching it in a sort of in a kind of Nick Broomfield way, where I'm trying to sort of like get something or kind of put people on the spot. I'm just talking to them like I would over dinner. Like if me and Neil Gaiman were sitting down talking about Sparks, we'd be having the same conversation. And I hope if the interviews feel quite relaxed and informal, and with Ron and Russell as well, it's because we're sort of just chatting. So it's kind of, and even though, the nice thing about that is the shooting of it is very formal. It's like, it's in black and white, and it's shot and lit really nicely, like a Richard Avedon photo. It's supposed to kind of be like the Richard Avedon cover of Big Beat, which is like a beautiful black and white photo. So we got this real formality to how it's shot, but the actual interviews hopefully are quite relaxed, because like I'm just chatting with the interviewees. And so I guess that was, and there are little things I didn't, it was some of the other things, like hearing me talk off camera, interjections and stuff. It wasn't like planned, or I didn't necessarily think that those things were going to make the edit. But then when they do come up organically, and it's just nice to leave it with the off camera sound, it just feels like, it feels just sort of organic and happening in the moment. And like we're all just talking about Sparks, and we want you to kind of be part of this conversation.
Yeah, no, that really is.
Witness this conversation, rather.
Yeah. No, there really is that openness and that authenticity to the conversations. And, like you said, you did every single one of these interviews yourself, and there's over 80 in the film. And what's great is you really break down a lot of minutia. It feels like you had the albums on hand so that they could pick them up and be tacit with them and tell stories about, well, this is what I think is going on with this image. You also have people breaking down, oh, this is a lyric that I like, and then this is why, talking about the structure of their music and really getting into the minutia. Was that something that just naturally came up in conversation, or did you ever go into these interviews and think about some of the themes and topics that you really wanted to be able to approach and include in the film in talking about their music?
I think there's a bit of both. I mean, like I said, it would be the same sort of conversations that you might have if you were sitting on the living room floor with a bunch of Sparks albums there and picking up and talking. And a lot of those things were completely unplanned. Like, I didn't know that me and Neil Gaiman were going to get into a deep dive talking about what exactly is happening on the cover of Propaganda. But it's there, and that's an album that he had as a kid. And it's like, oh, I thought about this. So some of those things are kind of unplanned. I think the thing that I was kind of new about each interviewee is that if there were people that I asked them what period you knew about, because there are some people who followed them their entire career, and there are other times when people are like, I zeroed in, like Steve Jones from the Sex Pistols was obsessed with Kimono My House and Propaganda, and then after that he's in the Sex Pistols, and like he's not following them in the same way, and then comes back to them later. So in that sense is that you could actually kind of like, you could actually tell the story of the band through different people in different periods, like not just age, because I was born in 1974, so I don't remember the first albums, but I remember the Giorgio Moroder one, because that's the first time I ever saw them, and it's the first time I ever owned them on vinyl. And there are other people that you sort of can see that their journey through the 5 decades is sort of sometimes just in the age of the people talking on screen. And so that's an amazing thing, is that like, they're not like a band like the Beatles or the Stones, where everything's centered around like a flashpoint of like, it was the 60s, or Stones early 70s as well. With Sparks, it's like, there's people talking about it that, like Patton Oswalt, for example, like he only really knew like the album Angst in My Pants, and could talk for like 45 minutes straight about Eaten by the Monster of Love. However, like when I asked him to do it, he said, oh yeah, I love Angst in My Pants. But it's like, and then like he then like started reading, like listening to everything else. So then he came in and goes, okay, I have a lot more to add than maybe when you first asked me about it. And that's great, because I feel like the thing with a band is that there's no right or wrong answer. It's all about people's different personal interpretations. And the great thing to me is that like in a documentary that you can cut between Tony Visconti and Giorgio Moroder, and like a fan that was a stage invader when she was 12 years old, and her story is as valid as theirs, because like anybody whose life is touched by Sparks in whatever way is like a story that I want to hear. So that was really nice as well, to talk to like fans, people who just like happen to go to a gig or happen to like meet them. I mean, the amazing thing, so how some of that came about was that there were people that we knew were fans, that were like celebrity fans that had said in the press that they were fans, like Duran Duran or New Order or Squeeze or the Sex Pistols, Steve Jones. And but then other people, like, I guessed that they were fans, and I just asked them outright. And that would be like Neil Gaiman and Beck and Flea and Mike Myers, Fred Armisen. I'd say, you like Sparks, right? I love Sparks. Oh, I'm doing a film about them. You got to come and talk about them. So that was like news to like Ron and Russell. They were like, you interviewing Mike Myers? Like, wow, okay. Then the last thing is that the producers and the archive team put the word out, and I did on my social media, like, to the fans, do you have any photos or videos or even a story about Sparks? And so that's how then we got some amazing like emails. And the woman, Julia Marcus, who was the 12-year-old stage invader, basically wrote this little essay about like her time when she stormed the stage in 1975. And I read it and I said, we should just get her to say that on camera. It's like amazing. And then interviewing her, and then her watching the footage back that she hadn't seen, she'd never seen the footage. And then happening to like have the roadie, who is the person who pulls her off, is also being interviewed, who happens to now be the Rolling Stones tour manager, one of the biggest tour managers on the planet. So just that thing where you can just do the breakdown of these events, it's just amazing. I mean, I could have honestly interviewed another 80 people, but we had to stop at some point.
I also really love the comedic sensibility and the humor throughout the film. And a lot of that comes from Sparks themselves, but also in the way that you've built a lot of the moments between them telling the stories, the setup that you have with the interviews, the animation that you bring in, and a lot of other aspects, and even down to the titles that you have under people, where you're interviewing Duran Duran and one of them's labeled as Duran and the other's labeled as Duran, or Jason Schwartzman being labeled Talia Shire's son. Did you find that you were taking a lot of cues from Sparks's sense of humor, or was that kind of your humor coming in, or some sort of amalgamation of the two?
It's probably an amalgamation of the two, but the thing that's important about Ron and Russell is that they are completely sincere in what they do, like in terms of like the songcraft and what they're saying with the song, and yet there's still like a sort of sometimes a self-reflexive sense of humor about it. And you can tell them about that as interviewees, is that they're kind of they're really like serious about what they do. It's their literal life's work, and yet they sort of have a sense of humor about themselves that's so sort of charming and self-deprecating. And I think that's the thing, is that what I love about them is that they've never felt that writing like 4-minute songs is beneath them, in a way that some bands as they get older kind of sort of like consider like the idea of playing the pop music game is like shallow or something. Sparks have never been like that, and they managed to sort of approach that for 50 years with a sense of humor. And so in that sense, me making the film is like, they are like a gift of a subject, because they're okay with like laughing about bad things that happened, or like they're okay at like looking back with like kind of, you know, with a really like sort of just healthy like sense of humor about everything, even the hard times. And also I think there's things that just came up about, it's sort of, I guess I hadn't really thought about how unusual it was until it was happening, but I interviewed them together for like the entire thing, because I had never seen Ron and Russell apart. Well, I say that I've seen Russell during the filming of the movie. I saw Russell without Ron like twice. I've never seen Ron without Russell. So to me, it's like talking to Sparks is talking to Ron and Russell. Right at the very end, though, I interviewed them for like 9 hours, over like 4 days or 5 days. And then I said, I want to interview you solo at the end. So I want to do like 90 minutes with Russell, 90 minutes with Ron. And what was really fascinating to me is that my PA, Leo, was in the green room, and they stayed for each other's interviews. And apparently they're not identical twins, but they do have that thing that when they were separated, they were like, how do you think it's going? You know, like worried about how the solo interview was going. But that was an interesting thing. That was sort of the first time I'd ever spoken to them one-on-one, was on camera. But there are things that I love about interviewing them together, is there's brilliant bits where like one of them is talking and obviously not telling a lie, but telling a very diplomatic version of something. And the other one is starting to smirk, like they know that's not quite the whole story. And they can't help but do that. And I found those bits were my like favorite bits. And any of those things where they sort of broke out of character, whatever that is, because I don't think there is any difference between Ron and Russell and Sparks. That was, to me, was like the real gold.
Right. And one of the moments where that happens is when they start to talk about, romantic relationships a little bit. You can tell that they're pulling back a little bit. But again, the smirk is there on screen. And I know that you've mentioned how one of the challenges in making this film was there is such a mystique around them. And especially because, they came at a time when the internet wasn't around and you couldn't know very much about bands. And so there's decades worth of mystery. And so what were the moments when you found either you or them were suddenly going, well, do we want to give this much information to the audience, or do we want to pull it back a little bit? Or was that even a consideration as you were filming?
Well, to be honest, and this is something I was perfectly happy to respect, in terms of we didn't really lay out what we were going to do, other than I was going to interview them at length and take them back to locations that meant something to them. And the only thing is, they said, we don't really want to talk about relationships. And I was totally happy to honor that, because I think if you've spent 50 years being enigmatic, and also you're going to show your working day and your sort of where you live and what your normal 9 to 5 day is as Sparks, or probably 9 to 7 in that case. But that said, is that they didn't want to talk about that. And I was perfectly happy to respect that. And yet when those things did come up organically, it's very unguarded and very charming and very revealing. And to their credit, they didn't ask me to cut them out. They didn't say when they watched it back saying, we don't want that to be in there. They were felt and there were some things that they haven't early on in the film, Todd Rundgren and Russell, discussed dating the same person. And it just comes off quite candid and, honest. And that was, I thought was to me was very sweet to see them sort of be able to talk about it. And then on top of that, I think sort of they existed in a pre-internet age to the point that they used to put out fake facts on their newsletters. So on their 70s newsletters, it used to say things like that they were the sons of Doris Day, and that they were ex-hand models. They worked as child hand models. So there was all these bullshit facts about Sparks out there that had never been disproved, and they weren't also that, just in terms of they don't really talk about their sexuality particularly, even though it's kind of, it's clear, but that's not important to kind of have to talk about it. And so I can't remember the point I was going to make, but so that's where the inspiration for the final mid-credit scene came in, is I thought, hey, what about if at the end of the movie, we just put out a bunch of bullshit Sparks facts. And so they wrote those facts, and I came up with the final one, which I'm not going to reveal in this interview, but it's a real mind bender of a twist. So if you're going to see the movie, make sure you stay through the credits for the final revelation. It's a twist worthy of The Sixth Sense.
And in directing the film as well, it's also not traditional in the sense that you said that they spent all their time together and they have such huge respect for each other. They also really appreciate and understand what the other person brings to the table, and that, they're not competing with each other in any way, shape or form. They really are collaborators in the truest sense. And so instead of the documentary being and then this is when they nearly broke up, and this is when they fell out, and this is what the conflict between them is, it's really about collaboration and perseverance. And at what point in the development stage in working with them on this did you realize that that was actually going to be the central theme and there wasn't going to be any conflict?
Well, I guess I'd known them a couple of years before I started making the documentary. So I wasn't aware that there was some big, terrible tabloid sort of secret between them. It seemed to me that they had managed in a difficult business, through ups and downs, to kind of stay together as a unit. And in a way, Russell had said sometimes, he sort of said, oh, do you think it matters that we don't have a terrible, tragedy or addiction story or a massive bust up, and I said, honestly, I think it's kind of really inspirational that you don't. To be honest, the film is sort of about an amazing story of mutual respect, because the difference between Ron and Russell and, say, Noel and Liam Gallagher, or Ray Davis and Dave Davis from the Kings, or the Everly Brothers, or Barry Gibb and Robin Gibb in the Bee Gees, is because in all of those other situations, you have two people who want to be the star. and two people who want to be the lead singer. And in amazingly, in Sparks, you have two brothers who understand exactly what the other one contributes and knows that they can't do the other thing. I mean, Russell does write lyrics as well, but he is obviously so in deference to his older brother in terms of like what he does is brilliant. And Ron says in the documentaries, I cannot do what he does. Even just the thought of like being on my own makes me so anxious that like I know that I could just not do it without him. So to me, that's like, it's a different story and it's like an unconventional story. But the fact that they've managed to succeed or managed to survive for 50 years without falling out is like, I find it quite moving, to be honest.
Yeah. And with the fact they have been going for 50 years and, you know, there's 25 albums, a few hundred songs, and throughout the documentary, you're really giving us the entire discography. And at the same time, you're really breaking it down to the minutia of individual moments in songs to show us specifically exactly what it is about this song that makes it special. And then we're going on to the next one and the next one and the evolution of their sound. So what were the challenges in really trying to encompass everything, but still making it so detailed to that degree?
I think it was obvious to me early on that like, I'm only going to get a chance to make this film once. If I don't make it comprehensive, I'll just have Sparks fans forever saying, oh, I can't believe you didn't cover, you know, like interior design or like, so I was aware of that. But also I felt like because they've been going for 50 years, through telling the story of this discography, you're also sort of going through pop culture for decades because you're seeing how they are adapting to the moving times or sometimes being 2 years ahead of it. And then also the crucial thing to me is, unlike maybe some other bands, with Sparks, the misses are as important as the hits, maybe even more important, because the misses are sort of character building, or usually they're things where like an album which like gets kind of no love at the time, then, you know, cut to like Flea, obsessed with 1977's Introducing Sparks, which is kind of like one of their lowest selling albums and one that they quickly kind of moved on from. But it's like, it has its fans and those people are going to be in other bands. And like, you may have just like fathered some more like sort of like bands out there with an album that you probably didn't think much about after it was released. So that to me was the sort of interesting thing, is even the albums that are like flops in inverted commas, they have a cultural footprint. And so by the time you get to the end of their career, their cultural footprint is enormous. Like, even if they themselves haven't always reaped the benefits of their work in the way that, you know, maybe they should have. But also it's like, the thing is, I think they have no regrets. And now, like 50 years later, you know, they have 2 movies out this year. They're working on another album. They have the opening film at the Cannes Film Festival. And you're thinking, like, would you want it any other way? I mean, like, if you'd have had massive success in the 70s, would then the brothers have broken up? Would they have, like, kept going? Would something else have happened? You know, like, it's difficult to say. So I think Sparks kind of, like, can look back now and pat themselves on the back and sort of say, well, it wasn't like the most conventional like journey, but it feels a bit like the tortoise and the hare. Do you know what I mean? It's like they did it, but they didn't do it. They did it their way, you know?
Yeah. And then lastly, from working on this film and getting to kind of see their process as creators and artists and how they've approached everything over the 50 years, what do you feel like you came away learning and understanding and maybe evolving for yourself as an artist and a storyteller?
I mean, I guess it would be the only thing to take away from it is like, I hope I'm that ambitious and uncompromising and hardworking when I'm in my 70s. I mean, that's the inspiration. You see it with film directors sometimes, where I look at somebody like George Miller and going, holy shit, you made Mad Max Fury Road when you were 71. That's amazing. Like, I want to do that. And then you look at what Sparks are doing. It's like, the thing is with Sparks is like, it's not like they ever like try to compromise what they do, and like to sort of like kind of stay the course and stick to your kind of like gut and your like sort of like artistic sort of inclinations rather than trying to think about what might be a hit or not, has been a difficult journey for them, and it's had its ups and downs, but it's like ultimately just like so inspiring. I think any like artist, not just musical artists, but like any person with creative ambitions, I hope would get a lot out of the documentary to sort of understand that success doesn't necessarily just mean like likes or like sales. It's like success on your own terms is the important thing.
Well, I came out of the film at Sundance with such a passion and appreciation because of the way that you've told this. And I didn't know their music before, and I haven't stopped listening to it since January. And I hope that it does the same for everyone else that watches it. And thank you so much, Edgar. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.